taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. Sangye chedang soti chognamla, jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi, dagi chinyen yipe sonamki, drola penchir sangye druparpo. Sangye chedang soti chognamla, Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi, dagi jinso gipe sonamki, rola penchir sangye druparsho. Sangye chadang soki chognam lan, Jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi, Dagi jinso gipe sonamki, drola penchir sangye drupasto. For immeasurable thoughts, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is completely free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And may we as potential bodhisattvas have the power to accomplish that. Aspiring. And us potentially, do it. All right, 7-limb prayer. And visualize your all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and your spiritual teachers in front of you as we recite this. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment. And the mandala offering. Saji perki jukshin leto, Tramri unleashing, Niden and body, Sangye Indo, Niden Rokunam da china Chakmashu Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Yayathayam. And the essence of causation mantra. Om Ye Dharma Hetu Prabhava Hetu Tesham Tathagata Tesham Chayo Niroda Evam Vahimaha Shramana Sloha. And the stanza 5 from the 18th chapter of Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. By extinguishing actions and afflictions, there is liberation. Actions and afflictions arise from misconceptions, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness. Why? So today we're continuing with the 9th chapter, the wisdom chapter. And Shantideva has been talking about what is sometimes termed as the selflessness of phenomena. Yeah. Or the selfless, or phenomenal identitylessness is the way Alan Wallace puts it in His Holiness's commentary on this text. Last week we talked about the selflessness. There are 4 types. There's phenomena. What was the first one? Remember? Golly. We talked about the selflessness of persons. But anyway, today we're talking about the selflessness.
They usually categorize selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena.
Yeah, but he's broken it down into 4 types of selflessness of phenomena. Anyway, this week's type is the selflessness of feelings. And when I first read this chapter, it really threw me for a loop, because this was not something that our teachers ever taught us. And I mentioned it to Kavita. I was wondering, well, is it just because I was so dense I didn't, hear them teaching this? And Kavita said, no, they never actually taught this.
Not directly, but
not directly.
It's definitely implied.
Yes, there are implied things here, but this is really something new information for me, the way it's put together. And I'll have to say, it was about a month ago. I woke up from a vivid, very short dream, and it was Geshe Drakpa, and he appeared as an ancient kind of hierophant on a throne. It didn't look like Geshe Drakpa at all, but I knew it was Geshe Drakpa. And this hierophant said to me, or Geshe Drakpa, in the form of the hierophant, said to me, you were going to be challenged now as a teacher. And I wasn't sure what was being referred to there. And I looked up hierophant, and they sort of dispense arcane knowledge, arcane information, hidden kind of information. And they also they have something to do with giving commentaries. And I thought, well, all right, that's pretty interesting, because all of this stuff is commentary. When I looked at this chapter, I knew that this was what was being referred to. This has been a challenge. I've been studying it, Kavita and I've been reading it with Kavita for maybe 3 weeks, the various commentaries. And hopefully, we'll be able to make some sense out of this.
Can I suggest that you give a context in terms of the 5 aggregates, because this was covered, the 5 aggregates we know were empty of inherent existence. Mm-hmm. So if you just briefly remind people about feelings as a component of our... Oh yeah, if you recall the 5 aggregates, and these are the aggregates of form and consciousness that make up the experience of the existence of what we call the person. And its form, and that has to do with matter. Feelings, that is, what we're referring to here in feelings are not necessarily, they are physical, mental, and what we would say emotional kinds of feelings. And then there is discrimination, compositional factors or mental formations, which are the kind of propensities and attributes and things we hold on our mind stream and carry with us, including karma, and then awareness, consciousness. So we're talking about when we're talking about feelings here, it has to do with consciousness. So we'll get right into this. According to Alan Wallace, who is the editor and translator for His Holiness's commentary on this chapter, he says the term feeling, as it's used here by Shantideva, refers to physical and mental experiences of pleasure, pain, and indifference. So that includes the whole gamut of emotions, and it's also talking about how this kind of a psychophysical effect that we all recognize with feelings will feel our gut, we'll feel something in our body, and we'll feel things like that. So there's a physical element to it. Alan Wallace is saying it's not referring to the touch, that when you touch something and you feel it physically like that, it's not actually referring to that. It's more the psychophysical, emotional, conscious kind of feelings that we all are very familiar with, but have not analyzed in the way Shantideva analyzes it here.
And that is what they're talking about when they talk about the 5 aggregates.
Yeah, and the aggregate feeling
That's what I'm just
in the 5 aggregates is what we're talking about here.
So it's key.
So the question then becomes, in what way do these feelings of mental and physical feelings of pleasure, pain, and indifference, how do they actually exist? What's the nature of them? So we all know our feelings seem to arise just spontaneously without our having to have any conscious preparation for them. And we instinctively feel as if those feelings are true. I'm angry, I'm happy. We have this instinctive feeling, this is so. And what happens with a lot of us is we trust our feelings. We tend to trust them. I mean, it's promoted in many parts of society, many segments. I mean, Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi saying to Luke Skywalker, trust your feelings, Luke, And so we need to know what we're talking about when we're saying trust our feelings. What are they? I think we need to push this up a little bit. So as long as our feelings are resulting in happiness for us, everything seems okay. But when we have feelings such as strong desire or attachment or anger or hatred, then those feelings cause sort of negative experiences for us. And those afflictive emotions are what actually cause us to behave in non-beneficial ways. Those afflictive emotions sort of, you could say, adhere or are imprinted on our mental continuum, and we carry them with us, and it becomes a problem for us. So those afflictive emotions, those feelings of desire, attachment, aversion, hatred, they cause us to act in unwholesome and deluded ways, which not only cause suffering to ourselves, but to others. And we all know this. We're all aware of what happens, when the feelings get to a boiling point and we have an outburst with somebody. We have a confrontation. And it's very hard sometimes to undo that, to heal that. And in some cases, those are lifelong splits that occur between people because of their feelings, So what Shantideva says is that until we can eliminate clinging to our feelings as being truly existent, we will be unable to abandon suffering. So you have to listen to the way he puts this. Abandon suffering. So we're going to be unable to actually turn away from it, to walk away from suffering, because we don't understand that suffering is arising from this thing that we're clinging to. The feelings of the ego, we don't want to let go of these. We have a very strong attachment and clinging to these feelings. And so it becomes very difficult for us to let go of them because we think these feelings are defining who we are. We think they exist truly and inherently, the way we think everything else does. So the very first thing that we have to clearly understand is, and we've talked about this a lot, what is meant by truly existent or truly real in this discussion. And both of these terms refer to any entity that is independently self-existent. That's what they're saying is what we think of as truly real, truly existent, is an independently self-existent thing. So, we would say this little pamphlet, little book on the 37 practices of a Bodhisattva. We look at it and think that it's an independently existing thing. We don't take into account everything that is that we are projecting onto this.
You
Doesn't
might
apply.
mention that is our default.
It is our default.
I mean,
of course.
that's what we do continuously.
Right. Well, we've talked about this a lot. We look around the room and everything appears to us as if it exists independently.
That's just how we go
Mhm.
about our day.
So of course, we do the same thing with our feelings. We do the same thing with that. However, he says, an independent state of being can't be verified or proved by either observation or experiment. It can't be proven. If you actually try to do it, it will not be proven that that thing exists independently unto itself. The fact and condition of our existence, as it is observed and actually is experienced, is that all phenomena, whether they be consciousnesses, matter, or some manner in which those two are related with one another and combined, all of those are in a continual and ever-changing state of moment-to-moment interdependence and interconnectedness. We're not aware of it. We don't see that it's actually happening that way. And so we think that that's not the case, that we think it's not the case that everything is interdependent and interconnected and constantly changing due to all of those influences. As we're sitting here, everything is constantly changing in our body. Everything is constantly changing in all of the objects around us. We don't see it. We're not aware of it, but it is occurring. Otherwise, things wouldn't be decaying. Things wouldn't get broken. We wouldn't age. We wouldn't die. Any of those things would not occur. But it's constantly changing. So nothing exists independently, self-existent in that way. So that's important to remember when we're talking about feelings as being truly existent. So to consider that any entity, anything, could truly be either independent or self-existent would be equivalent to considering an abstract concept to be something that was real, a real thing. Yet this is precisely what we do. When we reify or concretize things and cling to them as if they existed independently within their own distinct entity or selfness, that's what we're doing. We're concretizing them. We fail to take into account the undeniable spectrum of interdependent factors that every moment continuously influence all consciousness and matter, whether by having an effect on their mode of being, their circumstances, structure, growth, and development, or their mental and emotional conditions. You look around. There is nothing that is not changing like that. It just that is the way things are. So this includes the mental and physical experiences of pleasure, pain, and indifference that we call feelings. We cling to them and concretize them as if they existed independently within their own distinct identities we conventionally call joy, sorrow, guilt, happiness, depression, comfort, and so on. We think, there's a thing out there called depression that we can all fall into, that exists, and when we become depressed, this is the state of depression, this self-existent kind of state of depression. We're not aware we're doing this, but that is what we do. We concretize things. So we begin now with stanza 88. And Shantideva says, if suffering itself is truly real,
Why is joy not altogether quenched thereby? If pleasure's real, then why will pleasant tastes not comfort and amuse a man who is in agony? So if the feelings that we experience existed independently, that is, that they truly existed, they would not depend on any other circumstances. If that were the case, why would suffering not completely suppress and extinguish joy? A person who experienced suffering could never feel happy. If suffering could not change because it was independently self-existent and somebody was suffering, how could that ever change for them? I mean, this is not what our experience is, of course. And we say, well, that's kind of ridiculous to talk that way. But if we actually are thinking that these things exist in a way that they don't, this would be the outcome. If we actually thought a feeling was an independently existing thing, a truly existing thing, this would be the logical conclusion, that it could never change. It would not be subject to any other circumstances that it would affect it. On the other hand, if pleasure was truly real, and it was a self-defining, self-existent entity, then when one was experiencing suffering, why would sensual sources of pleasure, such as delicious food and drink, not bring comfort? So I'm going to leave it there, because the next stanza talks more about this. Stanza 89. If the feeling fails to be experienced through being overwhelmed by something stronger, how can feeling rightly be ascribed to that which lacks the character of being felt? So as always, these stanzas are need to be interpreted. So if pleasurable feelings were truly independently self-existent, then the pleasurable feeling that arises from eating delicious food would be unable to change. The person who was eating the food would necessarily experience the pleasure of it continuously. Robina talks about this a lot. She'll say, you love the chocolate cake, whatever it is, and so you have one piece and you go, oh my God, that was so good, so wonderful. There was such pleasure. Now I'm going to have another one and another one. And if the pleasure was truly existent from the taste of the chocolate cake, then the more you ate it, the happier you would be. But we all know that's not the case. The more we eat it, the more disgusting it becomes. So here's an example that Shantideva gives. Upon the unexpected death of a person's child, it would be impossible for her or him to experience the agony of grief. Because at that time, if they were eating pleasurable food, the feeling of eating delicious food would be giving that person truly existing, unchangeable pleasure. And we know that's not so. If you just had a child who passed away and somebody offered you some food that normally would be something you loved, you may not even want to eat it. It wouldn't be giving you pleasure. This is because the feelings are all dependent on circumstances and causes and how we are looking at those feelings at the particular time. In other words, feelings change. They can change. And this is important for us to understand how we can actually be truly happy as we go along here. So here's the other schools. Some of the other schools will say then, at times of grief, there can be pleasure as well, but the pleasure is not felt because of the more intense misery. So the other schools are saying, well, yes, you can have, your child has passed away,
just died. Somebody offers you some food for comfort. You eat a little bit. It does really nothing for you, but somewhere in some subtle way, the food tasted good to you. There was some pleasure that you got from that. Prasangika says, feeling is of the nature of experience. So if something is not being experienced, you can't call it a feeling. You can't apply the term feeling to it. So if you're, again, in this miserable state of agony, and there's something that normally would be giving you a pleasure, such as eating some comfort food, right? But you don't experience any pleasure from that. Well, how can you say that there's some kind of feeling there, even though you're not experiencing it? It doesn't make sense. You cannot experience something that, you cannot feel something that you're not experiencing, is the logical conclusion that Shantideva is saying. Stanza 90. Perhaps you say that only subtle pain remains when there's great delight. If there's something that's really, you're thrilled, you're this very, very happy moment that occurs. And you could maybe say that only subtle pain remains, and that its grosser form has now been overmastered or overshadowed, or rather it's felt as just mere pleasure. But what is subtle still remains itself. So the other schools are saying, when intense joy arises, even while there is subtle dissatisfaction remaining somewhere, the intense joy replaces the former gross unhappiness that was being experienced. It removes gross unhappiness, but subtle dissatisfaction still remains. Therefore, the gross unhappiness is not unexperienced, it's just experienced as subtle dissatisfaction. But what Shantideva says is, at such a time of intense joy, can you really say that there is an unenjoyable feeling that you're having? If there is a subtle feeling of dissatisfaction going on, in what way does the intense joy overcome it? If there is the presence of dissatisfaction, it doesn't make sense to say there is an intense feeling of joy taking place. How can there be intense joy if there is some subtle dissatisfaction? As long as dissatisfaction.
Sounds like every day.
Oh yeah, I get that.
How? I'll tell you, Shantideva. It's just that it flings back and forth so fast.
Right. As long as there is any dissatisfaction, there can be no real happiness. This is what Prasangika is saying. So the other schools come back. They say the strong feeling of pleasure dispels the gross feeling of pain, and the subtle pain that remains becomes a subtle feeling of pleasure. So the other schools are saying the subtle dissatisfaction or pain just sort of like transforms into some kind of subtle pleasure because of the intense joy you're feeling. So Shantideva responds and says, so now you're saying that subtle pain is actually in the nature of pleasure? How then can you say it's still painful? So the other schools say, all right, we concede your point. When there is the experience of intense joy, which is incompatible with suffering, suffering is not produced. Now, does this relate to any of you? Because I saw, you were going, oh no, I know what they're talking about.
I'm just thinking, like going back to the parents who lost the child example.
Yeah.
Thinking about some of the things you mentioned earlier about how the root of many of these things are our ego, self-grasping, and but basically we cling on to these afflictive and positive emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around, you have these parents who just lost a child, and yeah, it's really simple to say they taste chocolate cake that normally they would love, but in this instance, no, it doesn't taste so great because they're thinking about the child they lost. They're thinking about the life that the child could have had. They're thinking about the life they could have had with the child, and so on. So the afflictive emotion is sadness, right? And grief and loss. Are they, but no one wants to cling, I mean, except some people who live for drama and also just like to be the droopy dog and are always like everything is half empty versus half full, that clingingness to that type of perspective. In this case, I don't imagine that a parent would be like, oh, I want to feel like shit, you know, because I lost my child. So I'm just trying to deconstruct it in my mind because I'm having a similar situation with a pet who is suddenly very ill. And so am I clinging on to the desire to feel bad about this pet who may die? Or is it my ego grasping onto this dog as an object of affection and my sense of loss over time for this animal that I could have a relationship with, just like the parents having the loss of the relationship with the child? The clinging isn't necessary, my mind or consciousness or this physical being that is forming thoughts at the moment, doesn't, I'm trying to figure out, like I'm mind mapping it in my head, like really this clinging to the afflictive emotion isn't the clinging to the sense of sadness and grief and loss. It's really my ego or the parent's ego grasping onto what they envision their relationship with this child would be, their own personal sense of loss versus the sense of loss objectively in a compassionate perspective for the potential this child could have had.
Yeah.
That's just where I'm trying to go, wrap my mind around it as you're, you know,
Let me,
talking.
I'm gonna give mention something that I think, see if this rings true for you in what you're trying to unpack here. Years ago, we used to take care of a couple of feral cats. And one of them was ill, and I couldn't stand the sadness I was feeling watching this cat suffer. And so I took I felt, and I unpacked it at the time, I felt like in some ways, this is very selfish what I'm doing. I can't tolerate the feeling of watching this cat suffer, so I'm gonna take care of it. The side benefit was the cat also had less suffering. But honestly, the thing that drove me when I consciously unpacked it at the time was, I can't stand feeling this bad. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes, I think that's part of it. And also I'm thinking like it's hard to, like our goal is to be, we're aspiring bodhisattvas, right? So we're trying to develop compassion for everything and everyone that exists. And it starts with compassion for ourselves, but it's also, we have to really think about, like I thought about what truly is compassion and how do I manifest that in my daily life through my actions to differentiate it as best I can from selfishness or my ego grasping on something, or I perceive it, I'm trying to do better in the world by this and such, this action or like doing this, but what is truly my motivation? So it's kind of then also thinking about getting back to motivation. Like if you accidentally step on a cockroach and kill it, your intention wasn't to do that, but you did kill it, versus, oh, let me go get the raid spray and get rid of it right now. Right. So I'm kind of all over the place because there's a lot going on in my physical life right now, but it's just something that I'm thinking about, and just some of the things you're saying are resonating, that I'm trying to like relate them to my own fluctuating afflictive and positive emotions at the same time right now.
Of course, and that's what we should be doing. That's the whole purpose of
Sounds like you're right on track.
You know.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
Can you hear me? Good.
Yes.
So just this is my response to this discussion. When we experience, because I'm also going through feral cat things, it's interesting, sick kitty. But when we experience a strong emotion, no matter whether it's pleasure or pain or it's ego grasping or whatever, it's like there's something in our perceived environment or in our environment that has changed, or it's like we are digesting what is happening in our environment. Ayurvedic teaches this. So anything that happens, a loss or an event, we're digesting that information, and if it's something that we're really, really attached to, it's a strong emotion comes up, but it changes because we kind of go through layer by layer by layer of digesting it and understanding what's really happening. And so we can be conscious of a lot of these concepts that are given to us in our discussion and the teachings, but there's layers and layers and layers of understanding and acceptance, and it all the way down to the core. And I think that's probably the grief process. It's just digesting what has happened layer by layer by layer. And as we digest it, just like when we digest food, it goes through a process, and then it kind of transforms and changes. So
It's a good point. No, that's a good point. I like that analogy, actually, of the digestion. I think what Shantideva is trying to help us do on this Bodhisattva path is to quickly understand that. As a Bodhisattva, one's intention would always be to be of benefit. So in the case of somebody close who has who has died, and you're very close to that person, if we have the intention, I experienced this with my mother when she died, I would feel some emotions arising in me of this sadness, and mixed with unresolved issues and things like that, and I could feel that this sort of painful thing was starting to come up. But what I would do is I think about the teachings, and I go, all right, this is just all about being of benefit to my mother here while she's going through this process. And every time I did that, those painful feelings just disappeared, and I was focused on how can I help this person make this transition and do it in a way that is doesn't disturb her. And it completely it changed. There were actually, no painful feelings actually came about from doing that practice, by focusing on the other, focusing on how do I benefit this being, especially at a time of death. I think this is why Shantideva picked this example. It's so powerful for us. Everybody dies. Every being dies. There's no way around it. It's going to happen whether they're a child and they're 9 years old, or whether they're your mother and they're 93. But there still can be very, very strong emotions that we cling to and grasp at, that have to do with combine something about the relationship we're having with that being, and their feelings and our feelings about loss. And if we can just go, how can I benefit this being who is making this transition that we all make? How can I help them, rather than turn inward and get all caught up in my own distress about this? And what I found was that it just completely relieved that, and gave a focus that was actually the good focus in that situation. Same with a pet. If the decision whether to put them to sleep or let them suffer so that they can undo their karma of whatever they are experiencing, I would always go for, how can I be of benefit? How can I keep them from suffering here? It's not like you're killing them by giving them pain relievers, you're just relieving the pain.
I think, one of the things that overarching that Shantideva must be trying to illuminate here is the shifting seas of the realm of feeling within us. That aggregate of feeling is basically a shifting seas.
Mhm.
And it's shifting seas, you could say, or undulating clouds. It's constantly, and so it seems like what he's trying to lead us towards is to not pin it, try to concretize it is really what he's all
Mhm.
mainly after. Is
Yes,
to accept that these shifting feelings that we're all describing as we're trying to refine our wisdom, which will impact our feelings. Meanwhile, we need to be aware that this shifting is just gonna be the playing field. I think it's.
yeah, I think you're right, because that's where he goes with it, that the feelings themselves don't have an inherent substantial existence. It's like the shifting clouds, they just are going to keep changing. But we tend, because we tend to concretize or reify things, we will get a feeling and we'll want to hold on to it. It's not that we want to hold on to pain or suffering, but there is it can happen. For instance, when somebody gets into depression, it begins to just feed on itself, and it's as if the person cannot get out of the
Like
depression.
an undertow.
Yeah, like an undertow. And it's not that, it's that you're clinging, the feeling is also, it's almost as if the feeling has just overtaken you. And so if we understand what feelings are, we can quickly sort of let them go and reassess, what's really going on, what is the best thing to do in this situation, rather than just be overtaken by the feelings. Anyway, I'll continue. Okay, the other schools say, well, I'll read the stanza 91. If, because its opposite, comfort, is present, discomfort fails to manifest.
All right.
Is not the claim that it's an inherent feeling no more than a mental imputation. So what's being said here? So the other schools say, when delicious food is eaten and a pleasurable feeling occurs, at that time, there is no feeling of pain at all, because the delicious food is acting as a condition from which pleasure dependently arises. Therefore, the other schools say, delicious food is a cause that inherently produces the feeling of pleasure. And Shantideva responds by saying, depending on the person, the same food can act as a cause or the condition for feelings of both pleasure and revulsion. Therefore, in the example you give, the food is a cause of pleasure merely through conceptual imputation. You're making the mistake of conceiving feelings as if they were self-defining and self-existent. Robina uses this example all the time with food. You could go back to the chocolate cake one. If one piece of chocolate cake is going to be, give you pleasure, then 10 should give you pleasure, but 10 actually, make you sick. Or somebody would, for instance, I grew up, going to Cape Cod, and we would have mussels that we would, take from the sea, and we cook them, and we'd have little neck clams, and I grew to really love the taste of those. But somebody else could look at that and go, "Ah, that is so disgusting, I'm not even going to touch it." So you can see it depends on the person. It depends on how we view things, whether we think they are pleasurable or unpleasurable, good or bad. It's all a point of view, which is letting us see that the feelings themselves don't exist in and unto themselves as these distinct entities. We're the ones who are making this happen, but we don't see that we're doing it. And this is what Shantideva is trying to point out to us and let us understand how we do this, how this process occurs, and that we do have the ability to change that. So he says, the feelings of joy and sorrow don't exist independently within their own identity from their own side.
In the same way as the cause, the delicious food, is merely a conceptual imputation, it follows that the resulting feelings of pleasure or aversion themselves are also merely conceptual imputations. In this way, feelings are established as having no inherent existence. So the reason little neck clams would taste good to me and not to somebody else has everything to do with my conceptual imputation of what little neck clams are, how they should taste, and that taste is a good thing. Where the other person goes, that is the grossest thing I ever saw. I cannot believe you're putting that into your mouth, and it's stinky, and it's rubbery, and I hate it. And those are both conceptual imputations put onto the same thing and put onto a feeling of pleasure or aversion. So the pleasure and the aversion actually don't exist inherently, independently unto themselves. We're the ones who are conceptually imputing those feelings. And we do it with everything. It's hard because we are right in the middle of it. And we've been mistaken in our view of things and don't understand what we're doing. It's very difficult for us to cut through this. And this actually is kind of simple as compared to where he's going with this, because he then goes down to the subatomic particle level of this. And this is where I'm not sure I understand what he's saying. I'm getting a clearer picture though. Okay. So now we go to a section about the remedy for clinging to feelings. So this is stanza 92. Since so it is, the antidote is meditation and analysis. Absorption, grown in fields of their investigation, is indeed the food and sustenance of yogis. Kind of like reading ancient Shakespearean or something. All right, read it again. Since so it is, the antidote is meditation and analysis. Absorption, grown in fields of their investigation, is indeed the food and sustenance of yogis. Here's what he's saying here. There is a remedy for clinging to pleasure and other feelings as if they were real. A remedy that will break the chain of delusions that arise from that clinging, such as wanting this and not wanting that. That remedy is the meditation which examines and shows that feelings have no inherent existence in and of themselves. Apart from this meditation, there is no other antidote for grasping at the supposed reality of our feelings. Something that grips and convulses our world with a kind of collective insanity. And isn't that true?
Well,
Isn't that true?
okay, yes, I just wanna go to the verse itself
All right.
and see if this sounds, this is how I heard it, this is how. So what Shantideva is saying is, through analytical meditation on the true nature of feelings, through analytical meditation, yogis arrive at a conclusion, and then they hold that conclusion in single absorption, so that's single point of concentration.
Correct.
And that process of analytical meditation and then subsequent absorption on their realization, if you will, is their food.
Nourishes. Right.
It's what we in our lineage, the term vipassana is what they're talking about, absorptive. And that's where realizations spring forth from this pairing of analytical meditation with single pointed concentration. Once you, yeah, okay.
So right
So
now,
that's what he's saying.
yeah, right
I
now
mean, the verse itself is just saying that.
it is
Okay.
in a very flowery
All
way.
right, so and then you turn around and gave sort of a commentary on what it signifies or what it implies. So read your comment again. You should.
The
start
remedy,
that time.
there's a remedy for clinging to pleasure and other feelings as if they were real, and that remedy will break the chain of delusions that arise from clinging, such as wanting this and not wanting that. That remedy is the meditation, which examines and shows that feelings have no inherent existence in and of themselves. Apart from this meditation, there is no other antidote for grasping at the supposed reality of feelings. And something that he says, something that grips and convulses our world with a kind of collective insanity. This is what's causing all the problems, all the terror, the pain, the suffering.
Part of me thinks, I'm gonna point a finger towards all forms and all perspectives of media out there in the world. And part of me feels like the decision makers know that they can keep humanity convulsed by putting out all manner of headlines that just push our buttons. And they, having been in marketing and studied the way populations are segmented for marketing, I'm sure this, from a policymaker and a governmental level, they have a much more sophisticated way of segmenting human populations than I thought was pretty scary, even in the marketing realm. I mean, I feel as a Buddhist, like my job is to be really aware that the wording of every headline that it comes to my awareness is being presented intentionally to push a button or another. And so a lot of the supposed divisiveness that we're experiencing in our world today, in my opinion, is fed by the intentionally fed by powers that be, if you will, behind the scenes that are trying to steer our population. Simply put, as long as we're fighting and think we don't get along, and as long as this narrative of, oh, it's so divisive persists, we won't even notice that fucking Congress is robbing us blind. Sorry to use but I'm just saying, divide and conquer is the oldest trick of the book. So as a Buddhist, I feel like rather than me reacting to a story about right now, of course, there's a lot of debate about, let's say, what's happening in either Ukraine or the Middle East, or name your story, the border, anything. And we have this idea that we somehow might disagree and it could be a big conflagration. Well, when we really talk about the bare essentials, of each of these situations, we'd say, yeah, we don't think we agree. Killing people is not good. Finding a way for the planet to exist and cultures and civilizations and countries and whatever's to exist with wholesome, healthy environments and wholesome, healthy education. And I think no matter where you are on the spectrum, you would say, yeah, of course, your definitions would differ, but I think we're not encouraged to even have that conversation because there's such an effort right now to have us swallow the narrative that there's big division in our country. And I just want to point that out.
Yeah, well,
I do. I mean, I know I pointed out a lot, but I'm pointing it out again.
that's true.
And I just, in that same vein, I think it kind of goes back to something you mentioned earlier about and goes back even to conventional reality, and we have a desire to label things. It's because for some reason, as human beings, ambiguity is so uncomfortable. And so it has to be, all right, then you're on this side or that side. It can't just be like, let's look at this as a mosaic or a quilt that has all of these different facets, or a stone. I'm kind of mixing all my metaphors, but you get my point.
Yeah.
Versus like, oh, I'm on this side about the border versus this side, or I have this political view versus this, and you can't. It's like, it's okay if there's gray areas, because there are. But we can't see it that way because we don't feel comfortable with it.
There truly are great.
Right.
And it's gotten so bad, and I think you've experienced this. I certainly have. I think somewhere along the line I was asking the question, well, in terms of, say, a border. First of all, I want to openly say, I have not been down there recently. I used to have work in McAllen. But the point being is, I can't definitively say what the actual situation is, though I am aware that there's a lot of uncontrolled immigration, or whatever word you want to use. Well, if I had said 2 years ago to my sister, and I did, we should just side as a world. Should there be borders between countries, and countries be able to control who their citizenry is or not? And then, what do you, and I asked her, do you think you should have the right to just say, I want to go live in France? And the French country unquestionably should just let you in because you don't like the politics of this country and you'd rather like. And but when you ask at that time, when I asked that question, well, what does it do? If I even ask the question that openly, I must be anti-vax, I must have voted for Trump, I must not believe in climate change. I mean, this whole package of the way we've been manipulated to think it's this or that or this or that. I mean, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm just asking this question. So, I mean, I think we also, if you question who's funding scientific research, oh, well, you must be anti-vax and you voted for Trump and you're a conservative and you don't believe in climate change, and this whole, we
Package,
just, this whole package. And, we just watched the movie Don't Look Up, and it's sort of, I think it's a brilliant satire on this situation.
It is.
Anyway.
It's a current day.
And we as Buddhists have to not buy into this narrative that our country is so divided.
I think it's also important to remember that who you're talking about, the power structure, the people who are deciding, to present these views, or because through divisiveness, you can conquer. Well, those people are also grasping and clinging to what their feelings. They want the feeling of being in control, And so this is how you would do it. We have to recognize there are no bad guys, good guys here. We're all suffering from the same delusions. And it goes up to the top of the pyramid and down to the bottom of the pyramid. It's the same. We're all doing the same thing. And so we have to, with a lot of equanimity, look through that and cut through that and stop all of the blaming.
I would add that a lot of the clinging and the holding on fast to our beliefs is really unintentional to begin with. It's mostly at a shallow level of belief or whatever you believe. I mean, it's really easy to fall into the either or tracks without really going deeper to really figure out what you truly believe.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That's exactly why Shantideva is saying the remedy is, first of all, we have to analyze what's going on. We have to do what we're doing right now. I mean, we can't just take it in and say, oh, so I believe it because somebody said it. We must analyze what it is we're actually doing with our minds together. He goes further into this. The contemplation and meditation on the unreality of feelings, which arises from such a rich field of analysis. This yogic analysis that goes back in our lineage generations, which combines the analysis of emptiness with calm abiding, which was Kavita was saying, enables one to experience pleasure that is free from desire. Pleasure that is free from desire. It nourishes and sustains the qualities of one's realizations, and also sustains and nourishes the gross physical body of the meditator. So he's saying this is the purpose of the meditation, and this meditation is going to allow us to experience what it is to have pleasure without desire or clinging to it. And this is actually going to be beneficial for our whole physical body as well. For the matter and the consciousness, it's going to be of benefit to do this kind of analysis, do this kind of concentration meditation, and then this calm abiding, just resting in the realization that you've had. Since feelings are the root of craving and the main grounds for all disagreements and quarrels, it's our feelings, it is said that it is of vital importance to come to a clear-cut conviction that they are without any inherent existence of their own. We can and need to gradually become accustomed to this idea, gradually become accustomed to the idea that the feelings which we feel are so powerful, so strong, actually do not have any inherent existence of their own. We are the ones who are imputing a certain thing onto something and then creating this feeling. It's honey girl, she's probably fighting with Massimo. This is interesting. It has been said that among the disciples, all right, so he's saying the most important thing in the beginning that we should do, the most important thing in the beginning we should do is to acquire wisdom by listening to the teachings. It's sort of like what we're doing right now is the first step and the most important first step. And he says, it's been said that among the disciples of Buddha Shakyamuni, those who realized the truth were the ones who had received and absorbed into their minds the teachings of the previous Buddha, Kashyapa, who was the third Buddha of the present eon. In the future, therefore, when Buddha Maitreya, who will be the fifth and final Buddha of the present eon, when Buddha Maitreya appears, those who are listening to the teachings now will be born as the first of that Buddha's followers and will see the truth. So we're taking a very long view here. Gradually, over time, as we listen to the teachings, practice those teachings, meditate upon them, analyze them, get them into part of the way we think and are, our mental continuum. This will gradually grow and grow and grow so that at some point we will come in contact with an amazing enlightened being, teacher, who will, when they teach us, it is going to click and we will have those realizations ourselves very quickly. Nothing happens by magic. It's not by magic. It is by, like anything that you become extremely skilled at always requires, you need the information first. You need to analyze how that information is put together. You need to practice and put into practice that information, no matter what the skill is. And then gradually, you get more and more and more and more skilled until eventually you become what they would call an expert in your field, no matter what that field is. And that's how it works. And as Bodhisattvas, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to become an expert in being a benefit to others, basically, and being a benefit to the whole system of existence. So now we go into examining the cause of feelings, what causes feelings. And here's where it gets kind of technical, and it's actually amazing to me, as I've said before, that back in the 8th century, they were talking about subatomic particles. I mean, it's really fascinating. And this is coming from the yogis' realizations and the yogis' insights. So Shantideva now presents arguments that refute the true existence of feelings. We speak of feelings such as pleasure or pain being caused by contact with an object. An object is experienced through the combined interaction of the object, our sense organs, and our consciousness. Through that process, feelings arise. Shantideva now analyzes contact to see if that contact is truly existent or not. So, for instance, go back to the contact with the food, the clams. You see the clams and you, based on your own causes and conditions in history, you either go, wow, I can't wait to eat that. Or you go, that's the grossest thing I ever saw. I can't believe anybody would eat that. So that is, you're making that contact, you're making some decision based on that contact, and a feeling arises. So now he's going to go into this process in a technical way. So this is stanza 93. If between the sense power and a thing there is space, how will the two terms meet? And if there is no space, those two things form a unity. And therefore, in that case, what is it that meets with what? So this is just a little background information here. According to Buddhism, there are 5 internal sense faculties. They're also known as sense powers, which are based on the 5 physical sense organs. These sense powers are inner subtle forms which generate sensory consciousness, an awareness of the senses. If there is a space between the material particles that make up a sense faculty, a sense power, the material particles that make it up, and the material particles of the object that's being sensed by the sense power, if there's space between those two, where would the contact between those two things occur? Where would the contact between the sense power and the object that it is sensing, where would that contact between those two occur? If there is no space between the elementary particles of the sense power and the elementary particles of the object being sensed, those particles would inseparably occupy the same space if there's no space between them. In that case, they would become one. If particles had exactly the same location, they wouldn't be distinct from one another. So one really couldn't say where the sense faculty left off and the object began. And now we're going to get into some quantum physics. According to B. Alan Wallace, who is quite the scientist himself, in modern quantum field theory, the concept of individual elementary particles remains a problematic one. In addition, there is a lot of disagreement among well-known physicists concerning the actual nature of atoms, what an atom is. Physicist Bernard D'Espagnat, who died in 2015, claimed that atoms are merely properties of space. Physicist Henry Stapp, who is still alive, argues that atoms are a set of relationships. And Werner Heisenberg, who died in 1976, denied that atoms are things. The Prasangikas don't deny the existence of atoms, but they do refute the assumption that atoms exist as real entities that are independent of conceptual designation. So in other words, the Prasangikas are saying are atoms, the way that the mind conceives them, it's no different than the way the mind conceives and labels a clam as being, either delicious or gross. It's just that he's saying that the Prasangikas are saying the atoms don't exist inherently unto themselves, apart from or independent from the conceptual designation. And this is very similar to some current findings in the quantum physics. So now we go to stanza 94. No penetration can there be of particle by particle, for they are both the same in lacking volume. But if they do not penetrate, they do not merge, and if they do not merge, there's no encounter. So from the Buddhist perspective, 2 atoms can never possibly become one
because in order to do so, one would have to dissolve into the other. This is impossible according to Buddhism because they are equal in size and neither of them contains any empty space inside. Without any dissolution into one another, there can be no mixing of the two atoms and therefore no possibility of their meeting on all sides, each atom meeting each side of the other atom. So now we go back to Alan Wallace. He says that this particular Buddhist view would be contested by most contemporary physicists, citing the work of Australian physicist Ernest Rutherford in 1911, who experimentally demonstrated that most of the interior of an atom is composed of empty space. This idea is closely related to the old quantum theory of the planetary model of the atom, in which the electrons orbit about the nucleus. And we're all very familiar with that particular model. Alan Wallace says that modern quantum theory, with its wave-particle duality and uncertainty principle, now states that this model, this planetary model, cannot be regarded as a representation of the atom as an objective reality. The planetary model, though, is useful, and it's still being used as what he calls it a heuristic device. And a heuristic device is it's a device that, while not accurate or optimal, enables a general understanding, in this case of the atom, which serves as a guide in further investigating it. So a general understanding is that there are there's a nucleus and there are electrons and photons that are going around it. But they're not saying that this is actually the way it exists, but it's a good starting place to investigate further. Also, according to modern quantum field theory, empty space seems to be far from empty. However, in the context of this Buddhist text that we're studying, it's more important to recognize that the Buddhist concept of atoms differs radically from that of modern Western science. Buddhist yogis have used their own heightened powers of awareness, developed through rigorous training and meditation, as their means of exploring the smallest components of the physical world. Modern physicists use mechanical instruments and mathematics in formulating their atomic theories. In this situation, a lot of insight can be gleaned from Werner Heisenberg's comment when he said, "What we observe is not nature in itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." So it's the tools you're using and the questions you're asking are going to color the conclusions that you come to. So Alan Wallace is saying, given these two radically different methods of questioning, the yogic method and the scientific method, it's not surprising that the resulting theories differ as much as they do. Given the major differences between Buddhist contemplative views concerning the basic constituents of the natural world and the views of modern physical science, Alan Wallace puts forth the question, which of these views is more useful? But he then says this question needs to be refined to useful for what purpose? In terms of advancing technology, the theories and models of physics and chemistry are incomparably more useful. But in terms of transforming one's body and mind through contemplative practice, the views of Buddhist contemplatives are far more appropriate. That's just something to consider. Now we go to stanza 95. For how could anyone accept that what is partless could be said to meet? And you must show me if you ever saw a contact taking place between two partless things. If at the subtlest level, there is no space between subatomic particles, then they would be identical.
If there is actual contact between subatomic particles, and if that contact is made without those particles having any parts or attributes, this is something that needs to be proven and demonstrated. In other words, Shantideva is saying this, no, this hasn't occurred to anybody's knowledge. So now we go back to consciousness and feelings. Stanza 96. Consciousness is immaterial, and so one cannot speak of contact with it. A combination, too, has no reality, just as we have previously shown. And I think combination here, a better translation would have been collection. Combination. Combination means that things actually are combined. Collection means a collection of things, not necessarily one with one another. There can be no truly existent meeting of consciousness with matter, because consciousness has no material quality whatsoever. Consciousness is merely clear, luminous, and aware, according to Buddhism. So Buddhism makes a definite distinction between consciousness and matter, or between cognitive and physical events. Cognitions such as sensory awareness, memory, imagination, those things experience their respective objects of awareness. Sensory awareness experiences the object that it's sensing. Memory experiences the object that it's recalling. Physical entities certainly can contribute to the production of various types of cognition and consciousness, but physical entities themselves experience nothing. They don't have consciousness. Materialists may suppose that perception is nothing more than a physical process, but who has ever experientially verified this theory? The Prasangikas acknowledge the role various conditions play in the interaction between consciousness and matter, but it denies that any of these interactions have real intrinsic existence. Similarly, as we discussed previously when we were discussing the body, where the body is nothing more than a label for the collection of its parts, and its parts, such as the hands and so forth, are nothing more than labels for the collection of their parts, and so on, down to the microcosmic level of subatomic particles. The conclusion one comes to is that collections of material particles can actually have no true existence aside from the conventionally agreed upon labels that we give to them. And since these collections of material particles have no true existence, there can be no true contact with them. So stanza 97, I think we may get through this. If therefore there's no touch or contact, whence is that feeling? Takes its rise, takes its rise. What purpose is there then in all of our toil? For what is it indeed that torments what? Therefore, if there is no contact, which acts as a cause, where do feelings come from? Feelings themselves have no existence on the ultimate level. Ultimately, like everything else, they are empty of inherent existence. If that is so, what point is there in exhausting ourselves, chasing after pleasure and running away from pain? The pleasures that we desire and work for have no inherent existence of their own. It's the same with suffering. So, what suffering is tormenting what entity? It's just the delusion of the mind, the delusion of the consciousness. And consciousness itself is like an illusion in that it has no independent, unchangeable, inherent self-existence. Consciousness, which is merely clear, luminous, and aware, is dependent on previous moments of itself. Geshe Drakpa said it was like just water pouring into water, pouring into water, pouring into water, moment to moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. And there is no evidence that consciousness has a beginning and no evidence that consciousness has an end. So consciousness itself is a dependent arising, and it's depending upon previous moments of itself, which just keep generating. So now we're examining the result of feelings. If craving arises constantly in all sentient beings, which it seems to, how could feeling, which is the cause of craving, not be truly existent? That's the question. Stanza 98 says, since there is no subject for sensation, and sensation too lacks all existence, how is craving not arrested when all this is clearly understood? So that which feels, namely the mind and the self, and that which the mind and self experience, in this case, namely feelings, each have no inherent, independent self-existence at all. When we realize that the sentient being who feels and the feelings which are felt by that sentient being are both dependent arisings that are continually subject to change and therefore without any truly inherent existence, how could the result of feeling, namely craving, not be turned away from, since the cause of craving lacks all true existence? The only way we keep turning towards it is that because we don't understand what's going on. We don't understand the mistake we're making in thinking that everything somehow truly exists independently. This is so hardwired into us that it's going to take a lot of habituation to another view and a lot of thinking and analyzing about it and a lot of practicing a meditation on this and practicing it in our daily lives. And when feelings come up, practice, is it possible to just abandon that feeling? Is it possible to change that feeling? Is it possible to not cling to that feeling? Is it possible to have a pleasurable feeling without actually clinging to it? So this is all things that new things to take into our mind and into the idea of practicing and habituating ourselves to, but we have to understand the logic of what's being said and why we would do this, and what this means in terms of removing suffering for ourselves and others. In the second, so there's nothing at all that has a true mode of existence. The stanza that says this is stanza 99. It says, what we see and what we touch is stuff of dreams and mirages. If feeling is coincident or coincides or is simultaneous with consciousness, it follows that it is not seen thereby. So this gets explained. There's nothing at all that has a true mode of existing. However, this doesn't mean that the person who experiences feelings and the feelings themselves do not exist at all. They do exist, but in an untrue, illusion-like way. The things that we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch have a dreamlike and illusion-like quality. In the second line of this stanza, Shantideva says that if the consciousness which experiences a feeling and the feeling itself were to occur simultaneously, it would be impossible for the mind to observe the feeling. If distinct entities occur at exactly the same time, without one preceding the other, there cannot be a causal relationship between the experienced object and the experiencing subject. This is true for all states of awareness. This is from His Holiness's commentary. Thus, feelings are not observed by the awareness that arises in conjunction with them and that exists simultaneously with them. This is something we've sort of, we'll see further. This goes back to something we talked about when we were discussing the Chitta Matra mind-only school. So stanza 100. If the one arises first, the other after, memory occurs and not a direct sensation. Sensation is without perception of itself, and likewise, by another, it is not perceived. So here's what His Holiness says. A feeling is not observed by an awareness that exists prior to it. Prior to the feeling, the awareness does not is not felt, it's not observed. Nor is it directly observed by a later cognition that exists after the feeling has ceased. Neither is it correct to say that a feeling can feel itself. It can't be a self-feeling feeling, since that is contradictory to say that a sensation can sense itself. This argument is similar to the one I was talking about, to Shantideva's previous refutation of a self-cognizing consciousness earlier in the wisdom chapter in his critique of the Chitta Matra school. They're saying that it is impossible for that to occur. Thus, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, in terms of truly inherent existence, a subjective experience of feelings cannot be posited at all. Stanza 101. This is the last stanza of this section. The agent of sensation has no real existence. Thus, sensation, feelings, likewise have no being. What damage, therefore, can sensation do to it, this aggregate deprived of self? So in his commentary, His Holiness says that since the experiencer of feelings does not truly inherently exist, feelings don't inherently exist in reality either. So what harm can be inflicted upon this aggregate that is empty of an inherently existing self? Even though a person's physical and mental aggregates lack any intrinsic identity or self, we fail to recognize this, and mistakenly, we become attached to those aggregates. But when we analytically look for the self that is imputed onto the aggregates, we can't find it. How then could that non-inherently existing self actually be harmed? The self that we mistakenly cling to exists as nothing more than a mere conceptual label that is applied to a dependently arising collection of ever-changing consciousness and form. Grasping onto true existence is what makes us vulnerable to harm. Since there is no basis for such grasping, how can actual harm be inflicted upon that non-existent basis? And so that's where this particular section ends. And it kind of leaves us in a quandary here, because what we want to do is experience happiness and not experience suffering. And what's being said here is that neither of those have any kind of inherent true existence. But conventionally speaking, when we're talking about ourselves and others, this does exist. We do see it. And suffering does exist. Was it not? I wasn't.
Going forward, this is a more effective way.
Conventionally, they do exist. We experience suffering. And so what we want to do is learn how to direct our mind learn how to direct our feelings so that we can be of benefit to others, so that we don't cause more harm or suffering to ourselves or others, and can sort of bring about an overall change. And this would be one by one, person by person, in the consciousness of sentient beings, to the point where we finally understood there is a different way of existing other than the one we're existing in now. There's a different way of being. Doesn't mean that we will not exist, but there's another way to be. And it may not be the kind of thing we're used to, the kind of body we're used to, the kind of experience we're used to. I'll say again, this is what the tantric practice is geared in training one towards, moving towards the idea that there is another way that we can actually be. But we have to work where we're at right now. So even though all of the suffering that exists in the world right now, all of the suffering does not inherently exist. It does conventionally exist, and it is being experienced by others as suffering. And so what we want to be able to do is learn how to start to keep this from happening, how to remove the suffering and be of benefit. And that's what this path is about. But this is going to a really, really profound level and profound understanding in this section, this wisdom chapter section. So I hope that it's made some sense. Yeah.
I have a question. So if feelings are not inherently existent, and that, as we talked about earlier, two different consciousnesses can observe or experience the same entity and come to a different conclusion, then if we say that we wish to alleviate suffering, is it true that our perception of a circumstance or an entity that is suffering is subjective, i.e., based on our consciousness, and that the resulting desire to demonstrate compassion is also subjective, based on the consciousness that believes is trying to express compassion?
Yes, it has to be, because you can see there's so many examples that we can think of where somebody is suffering and there's someone else who has absolutely no compassion for them whatsoever and would perhaps like to continue to see them suffering. So it's absolutely subjective. If suffering always called for compassion, then that's what would happen. Everybody would be trying to relieve everyone else's suffering. They would see that this is not good. But it's yes, so it is subjective. Yes, it is.
And then by extension, it's possible, therefore, that a consciousness could perceive another entity to be suffering, but the entity that is perceived to be suffering doesn't perceive it to be suffering.
Yes.
Itself.
Yes. Yes.
And so if the first consciousness desires to alleviate suffering, to be compassionate, they would also then have to understand that the consciousness that they believe is suffering may not perceive suffering, and therefore may not welcome any assistance to alleviate suffering that they are not aware of.
Yes. This is the level this is getting to. And they say when you become enlightened, you become omniscient. Then you can see right away. You can size someone up and see exactly what it is they need and what they don't need. And and there's an understanding from an enlightened that an enlightened being, an enlightened omniscient being has, that they would know, is there anything to do right now? Do I just leave them alone? Or is there something I could do or say, or some tool that would help this consciousness along, this being along? Because the fact actually remains, if we are sentient beings, sort of trapped, compulsively trapped in the cycle of samsara, which is a cycle of suffering, what that is indicating is that we have not yet actually figured out how to become liberated from this. We have not actually yet had a direct experience of what the actual nature of things is. So even though there may be a sentient being who doesn't, you may think that they're suffering because of some situation they're in, and they say, I'm fine with this. It doesn't mean that at some level they are not confused. They're not going to experience suffering at some point. It doesn't mean that there's not a problem still, because all of samsara, in every realm of samsara, even in some of the highest, what they would call the God realms or the form and formless realms, there still is the beings in those realms still have not grasped or understood the actual nature of what reality is, which is what we're trying to do. And so any being that is compulsively trapped in samsara, I'm saying, aside from, say, a Buddha who or a very, very advanced, highly advanced Bodhisattva, who knows exactly what they're doing and why they have chosen to remain in samsara, to be of help. Any beings other than that kind of being would be at some level ignorant of the nature of reality, and therefore at some level they will experience confusion and distress and suffering of some sort. I don't know, that's my understanding. That's what we've been taught.
It's really subjective.
Well, thank you
And
for
it is-
helping to alleviate some of the confusion.
Like you said, it is subjective. It is subjective. What else have we got? That's what consciousness is. Consciousness is subjective. So that's an important thing to recognize, especially when we start to get into arguments and fights and disagreements and things like that. It's all subjective. There are points of view, and that's one of the first things to understand. And I love what Robina says. Just if you don't really understand what's going on, just keep your lips zipped and your hands to yourself. When you're out in public, because it's better to do that than to create more division by entering into the fray of some kind of fight or argument. Okay. All right, it is time. We're Tibetan class was not. Dickie canceled it today, so that will not be happening. I put it in the header of the email, but people might have not seen it. Okay, closing prayers. Any more? No.
Reason is, it's at 3 o'clock in famous South Texas style. The wind will be coming from the north, and in an hour it'll go from 80 degrees to 40 degrees. And so after class, we have a couple hours to batten down the hatches with the 20-mile-an-hour wind bringing
chairs, umbrellas, all that kind of thing.
And if those of you who lived here and know, it's going to be 32 a couple of times this week. Like, what the hell? I went swimming. Literally last night I went swimming, and I looked at the weather and I went, I guess this will be my last swim for the season.
Okay, so let's see, since we're quite behind, let's just go ahead and let's do the first of the dedication prayers, and let's say it in English. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And we've got to do the next one.
May the view of emptiness not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Oh, okay. Thank you, everybody. Good seeing you all.
Good seeing you too, guys. And
Thank
just
you, Christopher.
Thank you.
You're
Bye-bye.
bye, everyone.
Thank
Okay.
you, guys.
Okay,
Great class.
thank you. See you guys next time.
Yeah.